Hello folks, welcome to my session 10 Things to Think About When Developing an Application for Microsoft Teams. My name is Yannick Reekmans and day to day I work as a cloud solution architect in Belgium with a broad focus on the Microsoft Cloud. I'm also an Office Development MVP where I'm mainly active in the space of SharePoint and Microsoft Teams doing development. You can find my Twitter handle and the URL to my blog on the slides. Feel free to reach out. I try to respond to everything that's coming my way. Let's take a look at the agenda first. So we'll start with a small introduction about building applications for Microsoft Teams, and then we'll dive into 10 questions that you need answers to before you can even start developing your application. And in the end, of course, we'll do a small wrap-up. So you want to build an app. Building an app for Teams, you can approach it in different ways. First of all, you can look at the Microsoft Teams store and just take something that's ready-made and available for you to potentially reach your goal or bring you 90% of the way there. Now, if that doesn't work out for you, you can also try using the Power Platform to automate some tasks or use Power Apps to build a custom application for you that can be embedded into Microsoft Teams. You can also go in the array of custom built applications, but first, before you go there are some reference solutions available, ready-made applications that are available as app templates that can maybe have 90% of the functionality, you make some tweaks, and then you deploy them into your environment. Now, when you want to build your application, the first thing that you think about is if any of these three applications or ways can bring you there already, so that you don't need to start doing everything from scratch. Well, looking at the first thing, I'm assuming in this presentation that there's nothing in the Microsoft Teams store that will work for you, that also the Power Platform isn't a good fit for what you want to achieve, and that there are no reference solutions available that you can use. So the only thing left for us is to build a custom application totally from scratch. Now, you need to make a decision, or a lot of decisions. So let's check the first question that we need solving. The first one is, what problems are you trying to solve? You need to get a good picture to know who you want to help, who are the people that have a problem at the moment, and who are the people that you want to help with your custom built application. It's okay to put names on there, to picture them in your mind, just to know for whom you're building this application. And then you need to know what they do, what is their day-to-day job, what is their work, what do they need to automate, or where is your application necessary, why do they need it, and when do they need it, and where do they need it, at what time, is it a physical space, is it when they're doing online meetings? So you need to get a clear picture of why you need to build a custom application and for whom that you're doing it. Now, it's a good idea to describe the goal of your application. Be simple and concise, describe what your application will do, be goal-oriented and specific, and be also realistic. Just describing in 1 or 2 sentences, some sort of elevator pitch, what the goal is of your application. And once you've got a goal, focus on the story first. Start by creating some user stories, some focused texts that tell you or help you build this application. Describe what it needs to do, in what scenarios, where it has to be available, and don't really think about the solutions yet. Solutions will come later. You first need to know or have a clear vision of what you want to achieve. When you know that, it's a good thing to start reflecting on this scenario and ask yourself, if it really is warranted to use custom development and make this investment in this application. There are some questions that can help you decide whether or not it's a good idea to invest time and money in this custom development. So looking at those questions, we have to be very honest with ourselves and ask if it's a real problem that we're trying to solve, or is it one that we made up because we had a cool idea for an application, but there might not really be a problem that it solves. We also have to check how often that we think it will be used. If it's only 5 minutes a day, every day of the week, it might not be the best problem to solve with your custom application. And for how many people are we building it? How many people will be using this application? Is it worth building an application for only one person? It depends. Might not be for you or for me, but it might be if this helps your CEO or one of your executive board members to achieve their goal. It might be worth to do this investment. And then you have to decide whether or not the number of users is a good criteria of deciding if you want to start this custom development. And then you check, of course, the return on investment. If this application, for example, costs 2 hours to build, but it solves or decreases work time with 1 hour for a menial task, it's a good idea to, or it might be a good idea to actually build this application, because there's more automation, or it saves a lot more time than it costs to build it. Third, now you know that what your scenario is and that you really want to build it as a custom application, you need to decide which Teams app capability you will use to achieve this goal. Now, looking at the Teams app capabilities, there are a lot of options. Let's walk through them. So first of all, you've got the tab. A Teams tab is a canvas to host your UI. It's one of the most popular custom developments that are available. Maybe a bot. It's a smart chat for your users. It's an interaction with an automated system to ask questions, frequently asked questions, things like getting procedures for you. What do I need to do when I want to take sick leave or take a day off? These are the tasks that are great for a bot, or potentially automate some interactions. Instead of having the user fill in a form, you can have an interactive experience with a bot that will ask the questions and use your answers to automate a process. You've also got the message extensions, which allow you to share some rich cards inside Teams, inside of your conversations. Or you've got message actions. These are invoked on a Teams message, and they help you interpret the chat message on which it's invoked, and you can take an action on whatever has been said there. You've also got the task modules, which is a dialogue for tasks. It's a pop-up that you can use in most of the other experiences, like in tabs or bots. And of course, there are the notifications. They allow you to get attention of the users by mentioning them, or just posting to a channel to call attention to changes and things that users care about. Users, of course, can use the settings of their Teams to tweak the notification settings to their liking. Now, looking at these Teams app capabilities, they are put into two main categories. The first one is the canvas-based applications. We only put tabs here. This means you've got a full screen or half of a screen available to host your website or your canvas, host your UI, host your application to create a rich experience for your users. This is like a website. You can basically put anything that you want on there. It's your blank canvas and you can fill it with functionality. On the other hand, you've got the message-based capabilities. The message-based capabilities, they take an action based on messages. So you've got the message actions. They allow you to interpret chat, like I said before. So they're invoked on a specific chat message that is already posted either in a one-on-one chat or in a Teams chat. It will take that text inside of the message and send it to your application so you can do something with it. You've also got the message extensions. They take part inside the message as well. So when you're typing a message, you can use your custom message extension to embed some functionality right inside the message that you're going to post. For example, the message extensions that come out of the box are things like the YouTube message extension that allow you to search YouTube and embed some functionality right inside of your message. And then of course bots, which are always message-based. You send them messages and they answer in messages. Either they answer in text or they answer with a rich card. Now that you know your Teams app capabilities and you know or you have a good idea which one to choose when, you also have to choose the Teams app scope for your scenario. A Teams app can either be scoped in the team scope or in the personal scope. So in the team scope, it's where it surfaces information that is relevant for the team. So it's your application when it's put right inside a team or in a channel, or potentially in a one-on-one conversation or a group chat. It's supposed to surface relevant information or relevant functionality for the group of people that is involved in that message or in that conversation. Now, on the other hand, you've got the personal scope. This is where your users interact one-on-one with your application. So it's either a personal application that just shows relevant information for the user, or a one-on-one bot. So it's an interaction with the bot that's specific for your eyes only. For example, to request leave of absence from your company. A good example is the Planner app. In the Microsoft Teams Planner application shows the tasks for a specific team when it's put in the team scope, but when you activate it in your personal scope, it only shows the tasks that are assigned to you. Looking at scoping, we see that in the team scope, we can use tabs, message actions, message extensions, and bots. Now in the personal scope, you can do the same. You can also use tabs, message actions, message extensions, and bots. In a one-on-one bot or in a one-on-one conversation, you can still use message extensions and message actions. But you also have the possibility to create a personal app. This personal app is an application that's specific to you, and it will be accessible inside the application rail on the left-hand side of your Teams application. Now you're almost ready to start developing. So when you develop, you need a development framework for your application. Depending on the extensibility point that you want to use in your Teams application, it also results in the development framework that is associated with it. Looking at this, we're seeing that when you build a bot, it's using the bot framework v4 to create your bot. And the bot framework v4 SDK is available in C#, JavaScript, and Python. So yeah, either if you want to create a bot, you have to pick one of these three development platforms. The same goes for message extensions, because message extensions are also built on the bot framework v4, with the notable exception that a message extension cannot be built with Python. So you can still use C# and JavaScript to create your message extension, and for a bot you can also use Python. Now if you want to build a Microsoft Teams tab, you have basically unlimited choice of web frameworks, because a Microsoft Teams tab is just a website that's embedded right inside Microsoft Teams. So if you want to iframe your website, you can build your website in whatever technology that you're comfortable with. We see in the Microsoft system that, of course, most people tend to use Node.js and React, or look at C# ASP.NET in either the core or the MVC variants. But also, since the latest versions of SharePoint Framework, v1.9 and v1.10, you can use the SharePoint framework to build team scoped and personal scoped applications. So depending on the functionality or the accessibility point that you will use inside your application, you also have to pick a development framework. Once you've picked a development framework to build your backend code, of course, you also have to pick a user experience framework for your application. So this user experience framework is also depending on the functionality or the accessibility point where you want to use or what you want to build for your application. The first one being adaptive cards. Adaptive cards is a declarative UI. It's a JSON object that declares how or what needs to be put on your user interface, but not how it's styled. In an adaptive card, you use a JSON object to describe labels and values, images and buttons, and the fact that they have to be on the card, like you see on the screenshot on the left. It's cross-product, so when you use it in Skype, it will be rendered automatically by the hosting application. Skype will style the JSON, interpret the JSON object, and style it so that it fits inside the style design of Skype. The same goes for Android and iOS. On Windows 10 notifications and in Microsoft Teams. So depending on the hosting application, your declarative UI gets transformed into something that fits inside the hosting application. Adaptive cards are the one UX framework that's available for messaging extensions, bots, and connectors. If you work with one of these three, I advise to use adaptive cards. All three of them have also other cards frameworks that can be used, but adaptive cards is the only one that's currently cross-platform available and can be used across all three of these extensibility points. We've got 3 of the 4 extensibility points covered, but what about a UX framework for Teams tabs? Well, a tab is just a website, so you can use whatever framework you want. You can use the framework that's provided by Google if you like their controls, or maybe there's some third-party framework that you've bought already, or you created your own control framework within your company with your own design guidelines or design tools, and it's fine. You can use whatever is available, whatever you're comfortable with. But what if you want your app to look like all the first-party applications that Microsoft delivers on Office 365? Because I want my application to look like they belong inside of Teams. Well, lucky you, Microsoft has a very consistent UX framework story. Mainly, this is called Fluent UI. Now, Fluent UI is a collection of UX frameworks for creating beautiful cross-platform applications that share code, design, and interaction behavior. Well, you know that this sounds like marketing to sell this user experience framework, and it is a little bit like that, because Fluent UI is a collection of user experience frameworks, and it exists for both for web, Windows, iOS, Android, macOS, and it's cross-platform with a React Native implementation as well. But not all controls are available across all of the frameworks, but at least the design code or the design language is the same across all of them. Now, for the web, we're focusing, of course, on the web framework only. And the web framework of Fluent UI is also known as @FluentUI /React in the V7 version, and was previously known as Office UI Fabric React. So for those of you that have already heard about Office UI Fabric React, it got a name change very recently when Microsoft decided to bundle all of their UX framework activities underneath the Fluent UI branch, because their new design language is also called Fluent UI. And this is basically the UX framework that has a great set of controls and has the best support that's available for controls that look and feel like they belong in Office 365. There's only one problem. They don't really look like they belong in Microsoft Teams, which is maybe a bit of a problem when you're actually wanting to build an application for Microsoft Teams. It's because Teams has a bit of a digression from the Office UI design language and has some controls that don't really fit, or that the design language doesn't really fit in the rest of Office 365 or Microsoft 365. Now, the Microsoft Teams team has tried to alleviate that problem by creating, first of all, the Microsoft Teams UI control library, also known as MS Teams-UI-Components-React. And they contain some specific controls for Teams. Not all the same controls that are available in Fluent UI. They don't really use the same syntax, but they sometimes look similar to what's available in Fluent UI, but it was a separate effort driven by the Microsoft Teams team. And this set of controls, or these controls itself, are still available currently in the latest version of the App Studio application that's available in Microsoft Teams. But too bad, for about 2 years, there hasn't been any real development happening on this control library. So in essence, it's deprecated. It hasn't been announced like that, but there's no more work that's been done. There's no extensibility, no new components that are available, and there's nothing happening on the GitHub repository. And that's probably because they started a new approach or a new initiative to create better controls. And it's also called Fluent UI. Well, it's called Fluent UI now. It used to be called Stardust UI, v0.x.x, and it had the ambition to be a themable UX library. So they were basing themselves a little bit on the Office UI Fabric React, but improving those controls to make sure that they're themable, so that you could use those controls inside of Teams, and it would know that it existed inside of Teams, and it would look and feel like Teams. But when your application would be hosted in a website or in Office 365 in SharePoint, for example, then it could adapt and a different theme could be applied so that it looked and feel like it belonged in Office 365. The problem here is that they really made this complicated. So it started out as Stardust UI /React in a v0 version, and then it got renamed to @Fluent UI /React v0.x.x. So you can see here that it used to be called the same thing as what the new name of Office UI Fabric React was, only with a version number that's 0, and that's far below the v7 that's available for Office UI Fabric React. So this sparked some confusion with the community, so they decided that their best course of action was to rename this approach again to Fluent UI /React-Northstar v0.x.x. And React Northstar is the name of this Fluent UI driven control library that's available and still in use, still the official library for building applications for Microsoft Teams. Now, their status is a little bit unclear. And that's because Fluent UI has a new version in the works, basically V8. And in V8, they promised us that their controls would be themable. Problem is that this roadmap is still actively being defined, and it's really not clear if this is an approach where Northstar will be merging, or the good parts of Northstar will be merged inside of the good things of Office UI Fabric React v7, and then ending up with v8. It's also unclear if, because it will be themable, but it's unclear if there will be a theme out of the box available for Microsoft Teams. So basically, we don't really know where V8 will bring us with Fluent UI. The strong parts of Stardust or React North Star were the fact that it's themable and that depending on the hosting application, it would or could be adapted to look and feel like it belonged inside that hosting application, that you could still just build one application that adapts to the hosting framework. The team behind Fluent UI, in my opinion, isn't really doing a good job to make this clear. There is a roadmap defined on their GitHub, but it's very difficult to find. Some questions have been asked and the answers are rather indirect, saying that a blog post will be coming soon that describes all of our questions, or will try to answer all of our questions. Now we'll see where this goes, but a UX framework is still less clear than the marketing around Fluent UI wants you to believe. Now that we've got this out of the way, you have to start thinking about authentication scenarios in your application. So you're building an application, for example, a bot. Now, do your users need to be authenticated with your bot so that your bot knows who is connected to it, who will be using it, and can use that information to personalize the experience? So you'll have to check how to authenticate with your bot framework and how your bot backend code needs to respond to Microsoft Teams to trigger this authentication scenario. Same goes for messaging extensions. With a messaging extension, you're interacting with a line of business application or with an external system where you need to fetch information, you search for information, or you need to fetch some data and then render it right inside Teams. So it might be that the user needs to authenticate first so that your external system knows which information it can return upon a search query. And these scenarios are described in great detail on the docs.microsoft.com pages, and I'll put those links on the resources slide in the end. Now, bots and messaging extensions, they don't really have a UI except for the adaptive cards. Now with tabs, you've got a whole website that's shown right inside Microsoft Teams. So first of all, you have to think about all the authentication scenarios that can happen in your application inside of this tab. One of the first things is to think about is, do users need to be authenticated with with different credentials than with those that they're logged into Teams with? If this is the case, you need to define whether there are pages for which they don't need to log in and those that they need to log in, and how to trigger the authentication scenario using the Teams JavaScript SDK. If you just want to capture the logged in user or the credentials or the context of the user that's signed in into Teams, you can also use the Teams SDK, and you've got the possibility to either use some sort of active authentication or do a silent authentication. And in the it's almost GA, I believe, or it's GA by the time that this comes out. The status is a little bit unclear at the moment, but at least it's in preview to have a single sign-on in your Teams tabs. This basically means that when your tab loads inside Microsoft Teams, it will already do the authentication based on an Azure AD app registration that's done. So it's handled server-side to take the logged in credentials of the user and then log in into the application itself. This allows you to also use the conditional access policies on these custom applications that are hosted inside Microsoft Teams. And then there's also the scenario where it's okay to have to maybe not be logged in into the Teams tab, but it might be that your website needs to authenticate with some backend services, like an Azure function that returns the data. So you have to look at at all the methods supported to do some authentication between those backend systems, because in this case it ends up being more than one. It's your website that shows the data, but also one or more Azure functions in the backend that might need some OAuth authentication to fetch data. Now that you know what you want to build, what your goal is, which development framework you're going to use and how it will look and feel, and you mapped out all the authentication scenarios, you have to think about where this application will be shown. And you have to determine device support. Device support is something that's forgotten a lot of the times. I don't really have big slides about this topic. It's just one of the things that I see that's an important topic to discuss and that never happens. Or a lot of time doesn't happen at the moment where it's most useful to discuss this kind of things. And that means in the beginning, you define which applications or which devices your users have and where they will use your application most. Will your application be mostly used on a Windows desktop or maybe even a Mac or Linux desktop, because Teams runs there as well? Then you have a full screen available for example, your Teams tab. You have got a big screen, you've got a lot of space, you can put a lot of data on there. Now, if that same tab also has to be used on a small tablet or even a mobile phone, you have to really think about all the functionality and how you want to fit them on the screen, and if you maybe need to create some fluent design or a way to reflow the look and feel or the UX of your application to make sure that all of it is usable on a mobile phone as well. Now, of course, when you start to build this application and 95% of your users will be using it on a desktop, building it for mobile or optimizing it for mobile might not be the first priority. So it's very good to know where to put your investment, to know what devices your users will use. Now that you know all of this and know all of the stuff about your custom application, it's time to choose a tool that will simplify your development process. So now you're ready to start developing and you really don't want to build everything from scratch. You don't want to open Notepad and create your Teams tab just from scratch, from a blank canvas. So there are some tools that will help you generate or scaffold a basic application, and you just can run through that will help you out with the basic setup of a Teams application. The first one, and the one that existed for a long time, or for the longest time in this list, is the Yeoman generator for Microsoft Teams. This is an application or a tool or a tool set that's been started by Victor Reelan to scaffold a Teams tab or a Teams application for him to demo on his community talks. Because he had to create a lot of things and he really was sick of doing all of this manually. So he created a Yeoman generator for the people that also do SharePoint development or SharePoint framework development. They're familiar with this already because also the SharePoint team uses Yeoman and the Yeoman generator for SharePoint framework development. And this Yeoman generator for Teams is a community-driven effort, and it's hosted underneath the Patterns and Practices umbrella within Microsoft. And with the Yeoman generator, you can create tabs, bots, outgoing webhooks, connectors, messaging extensions, and you can also scaffold localization support and do validation of your Teams app package. Well, the validation itself isn't really happening in the Yeoman generator. The Yeoman generator is just a tooling to scaffold your application. It will generate the manifest file that's needed for your Teams application, You can build it and you can get every resource that you need to deploy it on Azure and to load the application in Microsoft Teams. Now, the validation of your app package is done in the Microsoft Teams App Studio. App Studio is an application that's available in the Teams store. It's delivered by Microsoft and it has a lot of functionality, one of which is the manifest editor. So it's a UI-based approach to edit some fields in your manifest file. It will guide you through putting all of your application information into the manifest file instead of you editing your manifest file in Visual Studio Code manually and potentially making some errors or forgetting to close some brackets or something while you and ending up in some parsing errors. So the App Studio gives you a UI to work with the manifest file. It also includes a cards editor and the control framework. Now the cards editor is not very interesting because I suggest you use adaptivecards.io, which is maintained a lot better by the actual Adaptive Cards team, and it also does everything cross-platform, so ignore that functionality in the Teams App Studio. The same goes for the control framework functionality. We discussed that already in the UX framework question. But the App Studio has the functionality of also validating your Teams manifest. So you can enter your app package inside App Studio and it provides you with a preliminary checklist to check if your app fulfills all the necessary qualifications to be put inside Microsoft Teams or maybe even be distributed worldwide through the public store. And this validation happens in App Studio. Now, at Build, a couple of weeks ago, Microsoft also released a Microsoft Teams toolkit for Visual Studio Code. It's currently an extension that's in preview, and it aims to solve the same problems that the Yeoman generator is already solving. So it's a bit strange that they put out a new functionality or a new extension that's not built on top of the Yeoman generator, and that they're not continuing the work that's already been done by the community. It's especially strange because their Teams toolkit at the moment only supports tabs and messaging extensions and not all of the other functionality that the Yeoman generator also has, but it does have the validation part baked in right inside the Teams toolkit. Now, looking at the current preview, it looks like this validation piece is basically the same thing that's included in the App Studio. So it's the same code that's compiled either as App Studio or shown in the Microsoft Teams toolkit. Another rather curious thing is that the Yeoman generator for Teams uses Node.js, TypeScript, and the Fluent UI like React Nordstar components to make your Teams application look like that belongs in Teams. But specifically, the TypeScript is notable because when Microsoft puts out their own toolkit in Visual Studio Code, they opted to use JavaScript code in all of the scaffolded files. So when you use the Microsoft Teams toolkit, you don't get a TypeScript-based application, but you get a JavaScript-based application. And this is curious, seeing that the most of Microsoft is moving away from writing native JavaScript to writing TypeScript because it has a lot of advantages. It also has disadvantages, but looking at what Microsoft is doing, TypeScript is at the forefront of their efforts. So it's strange that when the Microsoft Teams team puts out their toolkit, it's using JavaScript. You can also see that when we talked about the development platform, you see that both of these tooling or tools, they are JavaScript based or TypeScript based, and they don't generate any or they don't scaffold any code based on C#. Potentially, the Microsoft Teams toolkit for Visual Studio might resolve this, but this one is not available yet. It has been announced at Build 2020 a couple of weeks ago, but it is not available for preview, so we're not sure yet what's available in this toolkit. Seeing that it's rendered inside or used inside Visual Studio, it might be safe to assume that this one will scaffold the application files based on .NET or C#, and not just on JavaScript or TypeScript. And last but not least, now that you've built your application or you created a great application that is supposed to be available inside Microsoft Teams, you now have to choose a distribution method for your application. And you basically got three options. The first one is sideloading. Sideloading is the scenario where you go into Teams and you upload the app package yourself. This is, in my opinion, only a good practice for testing purposes and during your development phase. This allows you to quickly adjust the Teams app manifest and make it available in your Teams client for testing purposes. In some cases, this also is used in production. Sideloading in production is okay-ish when this application is just for you. Basically, you build your own custom Teams application, but you don't want to share this functionality with your teammates or the rest of your company. So you just want to upload it for you in your personal scope. So that's a possibility. Or when it's just for one specific team. Imagine you've got 20 teams that you're a member of in your organization, and this custom Teams application that you've built is only necessary in one specific team. Then you can go into the team and upload a custom application and upload your app package just for usage in that specific team. Now, as soon as you want to use or share this application with your colleagues or embedded in multiple teams right inside your Microsoft Teams, there are better ways to do this. The next one might be the one that resolves all these issues, being the tenant app catalog. Now, the tenant app catalog is there for distribution within your organization. It's a specific section in the Microsoft Teams store. So when you go into your Microsoft Teams application and you open the store, you'll see a custom category specific for your company. In this category, all the applications that you have custom developed or someone in your organization has developed is shared there and distributed there. An application to be distributed in a tenant app catalog, it has to be uploaded by a Teams administrator in the Teams admin center. So it has to be uploaded and will be available then inside the Microsoft Teams store, specific for your organization. Distributing your application this way allows also for this application to be used in the app permission policies and in the app setup policies. This allows a Teams administrator to assign an application to a specific group of users and make sure that only that group of users can actually use the application. And with the setup policies, a Teams administrator can use a setup policy to already install your custom application for a group of users and maybe even pin them on the left rail or the application rail in your Teams application. So there are a lot of advantages for using the tenant app catalog for distribution. But of course, as just a developer, you might have to go through all the procedures to get this application uploaded by a Teams administrator inside your Teams tenant app catalog. And then the last one is app source. Basically, app source is distribution to the whole world. This is where you can put an application that's available for even people or companies outside of your own company. So this is the Teams store. This is the place where you distribute your application. There will be also a business opportunity here to sell your application inside Teams, and then it can be distributed to your customers through AppSource. Now, getting your application in AppSource isn't so easy. You have to develop your applications following the design guidelines, And your application also has to meet the validation policies. You need to have a Partner Center account, so you need to be a Microsoft partner, and then you can upload your application through Partner Center. It has to go through a submission checklist, and it will be validated by Microsoft before it's shared with the world. So there is a bit more overhead of getting your application distributed outside of your own company. But if you're an ISV, this is a process that you have to go through to get your ID, your scenario, your application out in the world. And when your application is out of the world, everybody is happy, you've done your job, and I come to the end of this presentation. So, thank you for joining. Thank you for watching this recording. Normally I do a question and answer section at this time in the session, but since it's a recording, it's not possible. But if you've got questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm available on Twitter. I try to be very responsive. Or you can take a look at my blog on other ways to connect with me. I've got a LinkedIn. My email address is on there as well. So just shoot me a message, and I promise you that I will get back to you. I get back to every message that's coming my way. It might only take some time before I can answer it. Even weeks. It's busy for everyone in these times. So I hope you understand. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of this conference.